In today's video, we are going to be covering one of the strangest people that I have ever looked into, and that is a man named Dennis Nilsen. As a child, he'd rescue injured animals. He was shy and polite and, to be honest, was fairly unremarkable. Some people are born to be killers, and we often look back on the childhood of criminals who have carried out notorious crimes, and we see very clear trends, very clear patterns that almost always develop the profile of a monster. Whereas Dennis Nilsen's path towards his heinous crimes didn't resemble that of the killers that we've spoke of before. So what made this man go on to become one of the most evil, prolific, and downright weird serial killers in British history? This man's story makes the plots of horror movies feel far-fetched. A man who found peace and tranquility in death, just not his own. Today you're going to hear about a man who charmed, tricked and killed his victims. And instead of hiding his evidence, he watched Coronation Street with them. This man not only took the lives of his victims, but he lived with them. He was unable to distinguish the difference between corpses and companions. So just what do we know about the man who kept rotting bodies for company? What made him carry out his crimes? Why did people ever call a man who killed multiple innocent men the kindly killer? This is the story of Dennis Nilsen.
Right, before we get into this episode properly, I just want to say that this is a series of truly horrendous crimes. And what you'll see is that we are discussing one of the most evil serial killers in British history. So before we get into the episode, I just want to give you a quick warning that a lot of elements of this story, many of you may find distressing. And more than anything, our thoughts and prayers go out to all of the victims' friends and families, because listening to this story and finding out what actually happened to the victims must have been incredibly distressing for them. Now, with that all in mind, let me tell you a little bit about where we're starting this story. It's late 1970s in Britain, and the country was not a prosperous state at all. In 1976, the IMF bailed out Britain, and we had to get a $3.9 billion loan following a huge financial crash and economic downturn. Unemployment was at 5.2%, and many workers that had jobs were struggling so much that they had to strike to put pressure on businesses just to increase wages. It got so bad that rubbish piled up all around different cities in the UK because the rubbish workers were not working. It got so bad, in fact, in Leicester Square alone, that was actually renamed by the media Fester Square because of how bad it got. And because of this economic stagnation, many people had to turn to crime just to make ends meet. And in the 1970s, as a decade, crime increased year on year. In just 1971, crime increased 6% in just 6 months at the start of that year. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of young men all up and down the country that were struggling just to make ends meet and to put a roof over their heads. This wasn't a time of widespread acceptance and awareness of mental health or guidance on how to deal with addiction, as these topics were not widely discussed or supported. And so homelessness was very common indeed. In fact, at this time, over 53,000 people were deemed homeless in the UK. And without a permanent place to live and an address to send post and to actually recognize where you live, it was very, very difficult to secure work. And this led to a self-perpetuating loop of vagrancy and financial despair for thousands of people, more so than anywhere in London. And in 1978, there were 8,000 people that were reported missing just in London. And if you happen to be homeless and failed to claim welfare benefits, for example, there was no tracking, the government had no idea where you were, and so many people slipped through the cracks. And because of very basic police forensic evidence, there were no countrywide databases, and specifically because of the way that victims' testimony was actually treated. In fact, a lot of what people said wasn't listened to by police, and a lot of claims actually went uninvestigated. Criminals, and more specifically killers at the time, often evaded capture for far longer than we might expect. And this included killers like Peter Sutcliffe that we've made a video on. And if you want to watch that episode, it is linked in the top right hand corner. Only click on that after you finished this video. But you also had Harold Shipman, who started killing in 1975, and he murdered up to 250 patients in his care. You also had Bruce George Peter Lee, who was an arsonist who killed 15 people in Hull. And of course, you had Fred and Rose West, who murdered 12 young women and girls, including their own daughter, Heather. And this was all going on at this time.
Can I give you another one that committed his first murder in the same year? And this is eerily similar. International this time. I'm guessing you can guess who I'm talking about.
I'm going to guess Jeffrey Dahmer.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
And that won't be the last time that you hear this name in the episode. And through all of this, society itself was changing. The police were diverted by the IRA as they were targeting London with various different bombings. And in 1981, there was also huge civil unrest with the Brixton riots. And while there was legislation being passed that seemed to be impacting positive change on marginalised communities, like the Race Relations Act in 1976, which outlawed discrimination of race, nationality and ethnic origin in the workplace, and the Equal Pay Act of 1970, which helped protect female rights to equal pay, they did not target long-established prejudice in the wider society as a whole. For example, homosexuality had been decriminalised in England since 1967, but it was far from being socially accepted. So what happened is that you had thriving gay subcultures in areas of London like Soho and Earl's Court. But still, so many young men had to hide their sexuality from their family and friends for fear of not being accepted. And indeed, just in 1978, over 1,000 arrests were made on the gay community by the Metropolitan Police, which was known to be a very homophobic institution at this time. And the press wasn't much better. Indeed, they were often reporting young gay men as the lowest of the low and often used slurs against them as well. So with all of this context, London was poised to harbour one of the most deadly serial killers in British history. And his name was Dennis Nilsen.
But let's take it back to the start with Dennis Nilsen and learn a little bit more about his childhood and how he grew up. Dennis Nilsen was born on the 23rd of November 1945 to parents Elizabeth, or Betty, and Olof. His father was a Norwegian soldier, and his mother, better known as Betty, she was from Scotland. They had 3 kids together, Dennis being the middle child. And Dennis's mother would describe him as being shy, evasive, sometimes a little bit awkward as a child, but definitely not a troublemaker. I've already spoke about the fact that he used to care for injured animals and stuff like that, and he definitely had a compassionate side as a child. And it was his mother who he was closest with. And if you ask Dennis's father how he would describe his son, it might be hard to get a description from Olof because he wasn't really there. He was in the army, and therefore he was back and forth to Scotland during his time serving. He would never spend too long in Scotland. He would never spend too long with the family. It was reported that he was an alcoholic, and it was reported that he didn't take his marriage very seriously. And that meant that when he was just 4 years old, Dennis's mum and dad got divorced. His father moved back to Norway, and following the departure, Dennis's grandfather, Andrew White, took over as the sort of senior male role model within Dennis's life. Dennis actually once described him as his one true companion. And Andrew, Betty's father and Dennis's grandfather, took this responsibility very seriously. He wasn't just spending time with Dennis, he was spending quality time with his grandson. Not watching TV, or I suppose perhaps in those days listening to radio. They were going out and getting in amongst it. They were carrying out activities, picnics, trips to the harbour, to the beach and way more. And Andrew was a fisherman, meaning that much like Dennis's father, there were extended periods of time that he would be away for, but much unlike Dennis's actual biological father, Andrew would always return. Andrew would always give a date or at least a time frame of when he would be back. And do you know who, Josh, would be stood on the harbour waving at the boat as they came back and as the fishermen would arrive?
Go on, tell me.
it would be Dennis standing there waiting for his grandfather to return, clearly filled with excitement. So far, broken home, yes. But to be honest, I mean, you in effect, you could say you came from a broken home. You haven't gone on to kill people. It's not to an extent what we're used to seeing from these sort of characters. Would you agree in terms of the build-up?
No, we're not being shown someone that has had such a troubled upbringing that you would expect them to go on and do horrible things.
And also, what's a very common trend when we speak about these serial killers and animals?
Usually, what they do is they harm animals very early on.
And what did Dennis Nilsen do?
Well, it's been reported that he actually nurtured some animals. He really looked after them.
There were reports of that, although I believe that you might be able to shed some light on that at some point here. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to distinguish the trigger point. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yes,
I'm trying to work out where the major event that took place that sent this guy's brain like that, right? Do you remember, or have you ever seen a dead body?
I've never seen a dead body, no.
Okay, right.
I class myself very lucky to have not seen one yet.
Of course, yeah. I remember the first time that I saw one, and it's
sticks with you.
Stays with you.
Forever.
With you. Yeah. I was a little bit older than Dennis was himself, because in 1951, Andrew White, the father figure, Dennis's closest companion, he has a heart attack out at sea, right? And it wasn't irregular to have open coffins back in those days.
Yep.
What was probably more irregular is the fact that rather than at a morgue or, wherever you would have them, I don't really know, often until a funeral would take place, and even sometimes funerals would take place inside people's houses, and you would bring the casket and therefore the body to the wake and things like that. Right? The reports of how this situation unfolded actually vary quite a lot. But if the worst is to be believed, then Dennis Nilsen's mum, Betty, didn't tell him that his grandfather had passed away.
No, he just thought he said he thought he was sleeping. That's what he thought.
She said to him, do you want to go and see your grandfather?
Yeah.
He got excited and said, yeah. And he walked in, and on the table is something that he's never seen before. He's not seen a coffin. He's not been to a funeral. He's well young. Yeah. And his grandfather's there in a wooden box.
Yeah.
And like you say, listen, I was older the first time I see a dead body, but you know a dead body from a live body. Dennis Nilsen said he thought he was sleeping, but he's also added in memoirs and stuff since that she said to him that he had gone to a better place. This, to me, I think is the trigger point when something must have changed in Dennis Nilsen's just genetic makeup mentally. Or would you disagree with that?
Well, the fact that he was, I wouldn't necessarily say tricked, but he was surprised by this incident, and he's seen something so momentous, so huge at that point that it would stick in his brain for the rest of his life. I can absolutely see why you would think that this would be a trigger point.
Yeah. And he actually stated himself that this was when his perception between love and death became fused, basically, because, he's looking at someone he loves so much and they're dead. At the same time, they look peaceful and tranquil. And when I say it's hard for me to get my head round, but it is a weird one, this Dennis Nilsen case, because we'll go on to, I was texting you about it last night. It is a weird one because there are so many things in it where, like, never saying I feel sorry for him, but there's more parts of this case when at times you can get inside his head a little bit more than some of the killers that we've covered.
There's a lot of contradictions though, isn't there? There's a lot of seeing someone at rest when they've passed away without necessarily giving the context of there's a life there and there's thoughts and friends and memories and everything that comes along with, a full human life. So I think we go on to this later about detachment and how he's able to see himself, in the third person almost. And I think this is where that sort of starts.
Well, when you say about detachment, right, it's funny because not long after that, you said that in the time after, and this is obviously once he's grown up, he's grown older and he's wrote memoirs and whatnot. We'll get into all of that from prison. But he basically said that after that, he felt like a dog that wasn't getting pet, and he felt like he needed a cuddle, but it wasn't in his personality or profile, I suppose, to ask for one, didn't have the confidence, and he was never offered one. apparently. Again, listen, right? When these killers write their memoirs and stuff like that, let's be honest, they're always going to try and garner a bit of sympathy, and they're always going to try and make themselves look like they had a really hard time. And the evidence the evidence suggests that Dennis Nilsen had quite a normal life. He didn't have that hard a time. You do realise out of like 15, 20 mates of mine, and I know this is a different time, but me and one other are the only two out of all of us boys whose parents are together. So your parents splitting up, and as bad as it is seeing a dead body, is not it does not make you a complete outlier when it comes to the experiences of everyone else growing up.
No.
Everyone else growing up has had probably comparable experiences to Dennis Nilsen. So I'm not undermining what may have shaped his mind to become the way it did, but what I'm saying is so far, I don't feel we're following the classic path of a serial killer. And just years after his grandfather passed away, Dennis would have another experience that shaped him, and this was when he actually nearly drowned. According to his memoirs that he wrote later, he enjoyed it. He said it felt peaceful and tranquil under the water. And when someone saved him, the noise was deafening. And the reality of not dying was almost sad for him. It led Nilsen to view death not as a violent end, but of a state of ultimate stillness and beauty. When he was 8 or 9, his mother remarried, and as you could imagine, Dennis didn't like this. He didn't like the man, he didn't like the fact that the man already had 4 kids, and he hated the fact that he had to move area. And I can kind of sympathise with him in a way. I remember there was a time when I was about the same age, 9 or 10 years old, and my parents really wanted to move out of the area or to move country. Me and my sister, who were around that age, it would have been the worst thing ever. So I can understand that he would have felt a lot of resentment with the changes happening in his life that he wasn't in control of. And that word control there will probably become quite important as we continue to talk about this man. But by the age of 15, he does leave home and he joins the army, and he serves for 11 years in the British Army. He reached the rank of corporal by the end of it. He had served in Germany, Yemen, Cyprus, Norway, and many more places. His comrades described him consistently during that period as a loner. Some said that he was a guy with a weird sense of humour, and during his time in the army, amongst many more traits he picked up, he learned to become both a butcher and a chef. Do you want to know a mad fact about his time during the army?
Please do tell me.
Do you remember when we covered the actor Leslie Grantham who played Dirty Den in EastEnders?
I do remember this, yeah.
And I
did a short on it.
Yeah, I told you that when he was in the army, he shot a taxi driver in West Germany somewhere.
Yeah, I remember that, yep.
And he went to prison for murder and whatnot.
There's not a connection with this case.
Oh, yes. Guess who he was serving with at the time?
Dennis Nilsen.
Dennis Nilsen he was serving with at the time. Dennis Nilsen was fingerprinted for that crime.
In Germany?
Yeah, had his fingerprints taken for that crime, allegedly. And he also gave a description of Leslie Grantham, the actor that played Dirty Den.
Wow.
I think when he was writing his book or whatever, obviously this was a key point people were interested in because that guy went on to be famous. They asked him if he ever had a relationship and he said no, not at all. He said he was very much boisterous. He said he was very popular. And he said he was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, saying like laddish or something like that. You know what I mean? He was a big, large and life personality, and Dennis wasn't. Anyway, in 1972, he leaves the army, and for 3 months, he goes back to live with his mother. And things are going all right. I think he's doing a bit of work or looking for work at least, but they're sat down for a family meal one day, and apparently a discussion about gay rights comes up. Now, if I said to you, Josh, you didn't know nothing about me, you didn't know my background or anything like that, but if a discussion came up and I said, yeah, of course, like homosexuals should have the same rights as other people and stuff like that, would it make you assume that I myself am a homosexual?
No, not necessarily at all.
No. Because
is it literally?
Why would you be?
But the family did not react in that way, did they?
In the 1970s, if you like now, yeah, I would say I'm quite a bloke's bloke. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I would share the opinion that everyone should have the same sort of rights and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? In the 1970s, not only was that not the case for Dennis Nilsen to argue that that there should be equal rights for homosexuals, heterosexuals, everything else, that was enough for his brother to then tell his parents that Dennis himself was gay. Now, whether Dennis was or wasn't a homosexual man is kind of irrelevant, because the point is, this infuriated Dennis.
So much so that he actually moved out of the family home and pretty much became estranged from the family from that point. I think he never spoke to his brother ever again.
You're exactly right, yeah. And obviously, look, if you're a little bit worried about homophobia, what's the next thing you go and do after you're worried about your family being a little bit homophobic in the 1970s?
You go straight to London.
You go straight to London, join the police force. No homophobia going on there.
And obviously, Joey is joking at this point because it is very well known that the Metropolitan Police were incredibly homophobic in this period of time. And so this was a very strange job for him to want to go and do. But it makes sense because he had the army connection.
Exactly. From that aspect, I would agree with you. From another side of things, you could also say it does make sense. He's got the sort of disciplinarian style behaviour. I would pick that up from like the way he talks to people in the home footage that we've seen of him, stuff like that. And obviously the army connection. We can't deny that that is a footpath that's been trodden many, many times before, isn't it? Although this only lasts for 11 months, his time training up to be a police officer, and less than a year into that role, once he actually qualifies, by the way, which is kind of strange, he leaves the police force in its entirety, and he actually claims that it conflicted with his gay lifestyle.
Now, before he did actually leave, I don't know if you know this, Joe, but he actually did a sort of like I suppose a sort of not a revolutionary act, but sort of an act of defiance where he actually kissed another man while wearing his police uniform, which was very much looked down upon by the police force at that time. And in fact, might have contributed to him potentially leaving.
And then, from a crime perspective, the first significant moment happens. The police first encountered Dennis Nilsen from the other side of the law. A man named David Painter, who Dennis Nilsen had met through his recruitment, said that he woke one night and he caught Dennis Nilsen stood over him, taking photographs of him. David Painter jumps up immediately out of bed. He starts fighting with Dennis Nilsen, and I don't know the exact injury, but what I do know is David was hospitalized after this. The police questioned Dennis Nilsen, but they release him without any charge. And unfortunately, you'll see that this is a very common trend with a lot of the men that had encounters with Dennis Nilsen. 2 years later, Dennis moves into 195 Melrose Avenue, and this is where briefly things get better for him. He meets a man. They fall in love. The man's name was David Gallatin, and although they were together, their relationship was strained. It was rocky, and after 2 years, they broke up. And I believe that this breakup sent Dennis into a downwards spiral. He was secluding himself. He was at home and he was drinking constantly on his own. It's the kind of typical decline that you see before something bad starts to happen, in my opinion. And that takes us to the 30th of December, 1978.
Joey, do you have any holidays coming up this year?
Of course I do.
I know you do. And how many times are you going away?
Well, I'm going away in about 10 days.
And obviously what you're going to do before you go away is pick up a little Saily eSIM, I presume.
No. Why would I need to pick one up? I've got one.
Of course you've actually already got one. It's classic Joey. He plans ahead.
You don't ask a well-travelled man if they know about Saily, mate. God's sake.
And that's because Saily gives you instant mobile data access in over 200 different locations worldwide. And that's without all of the ridiculous roaming charges that you would get if you just use your normal SIM plan. Yep, that's no physical SIM cards, no queuing at airports, and no waiting for a dodgy kiosk when you land. So here's how it works. You download the Saily app, pick your country, let's say the United States, choose how much data you want and for how long, and then you just install the eSIM. You only ever need to do that once. Every other plan that you buy from then on will be activated against that SIM that you buy. And the best part is when you land, it activates instantly. You don't need to do anything else. And that means you get online straight away. The first thing that Joey will be doing is posting those selfies with his top off. He does that every single time. And what we found when we've been away together is that Saily eSIM is actually faster more often than the hotel Wi-Fi. So you don't even need to bother logging into that. Plus, you also get inbuilt ad blocking as part of your Saily plan. And there's 24-hour support. So if you need anything, you can contact them and get help straight away. They even have a money-back guarantee so that if your SIM doesn't work for any reason, you will get a full refund. So download the Saily app today using the link in the description. If you use code Joey and Josh, you will get 15% off your order. Remember, that link is saily.com/Joey and Josh. If you pick up a Saily eSIM plan on us, you'll be supporting the channel and allow us to keep making this content for you. Thank you to every single one of you that has supported them so far. We really, really appreciate it. Now let's get back into the video. So by this point, Dennis was really struggling at work. A lot of his colleagues found him to be irritable and very unlikable in the office. So he was constantly being shunned for promotions and wasn't progressing in his career in any way. And he was feeling more and more lonely without David. He was trying to find companions. He would often bring people back, but he never truly had that partner, that companion that was able to bring him joy and fun in his life. So what he started to do was started drinking more. And when he drank more, his fantasies became more and more overt and more dark. He developed what could only be described as a mirror fetish. What he would do is put talcum powder all over his body. He would put charcoal underneath his eyes and he would look at himself in the mirror. He would sit very still as if he was almost a lifeless corpse. And this practice became more and more common and he would do it more and more often. So by Christmas of 1978, the loneliness was very much getting to him. He was in the house alone. All he had was his dog Bleep to keep him company. But he felt that that just wasn't enough. So by December the 30th, he went out to various different pubs, started drinking and was looking for someone to spend the night with. And unfortunately, he came across a young boy called Stephen, who was only 14 at the time.
Can I tell you what I found surprising? Because obviously there's so many different accounts of where Dennis Nilsen meets men, and you're about to tell us of the first one here. But his success rate in being able to get men either back to his apartment, just in terms of being able to chat up and approach other men. When we speak about him as a child, being shy, not being popular, being described as a loner, something changed because he did become confident. And I've seen multiple interviews of people who had near misses with Dennis Nilsen, who said that he was the one to initiate conversation in these bars. He came across as confident, stern at the same time, but very much so like a man who carried himself with that air of belief and air of confidence. And that's not how he was portrayed as a young child. So something must have changed. And maybe that was the move away from his familiarities.
Yeah, 100%. But also a lot of people did say that he was fairly boring and quite unmemorable, really. He would very often wear sort of very plain clothes. He wasn't known as the life and soul of the party, but what he was very able to do is come across as very friendly and very approachable. And that is how he started a lot of these conversations. And this starts with Stephen, because Stephen was only 14 when Dennis met him, and Dennis was 33 years old. Obviously, Stephen was in a pub. He was walking home from a concert. He stepped into a pub. He tried to buy an alcoholic drink. The people at the pub said, no, you cannot have an alcoholic drink. You're way too young. And Dennis saw this. He took advantage of the vulnerability. He goes up to Stephen. He says, look, if you come back with me, we can go back to my flat. I'll get you loads of drink and we can have a good night from there. And so Stephen does follow him back to his flat and they start to carry on drinking and they listen to music as well. And it goes on until very late in the evening, so much so that the two actually went to bed and they ended up spending the night together. And as the sun rose outside, Dennis wakes up and watches the teenager sleep. And we know this because of first-hand accounts that Dennis said to an author called Brian Masters. So what we're going to say in all of these cases is we're going to be using first-hand accounts of what Dennis actually said happened in all of these attacks. But just remember that a lot of this evidence and a lot of what Dennis says has to be taken with a pinch of salt because it's coming from him and you don't get the other side of the story. And as he watches this boy, he touches him and he starts to get aroused. But then he remembers the fact that Stephen will be waking up very soon, that he's 14 years old and that he'll be leaving him and he'll be alone again for New Year's Eve. And what Dennis didn't want to do was allow that to happen. So what he did is pick up a necktie from the floor. He slipped it over Stephen's head, straddled his body and pulled the tie tight. A fierce struggle ensued and Stephen woke up and fought back, causing the two to tumble off the bed onto the floor, knock over a coffee table, and eventually Stephen then loses consciousness and continues to breathe raspily. Determined to finish the act, Nilsen went to the kitchen, filled up a plastic bucket with water and held Stephen's head under the water until he drowned. And Dennis kept Stephen's body in the flat and viewed him as company for New Year's Eve. What he would do in so many of these cases is that he then went on to wash the body in the bathtub. He then got Stephen's body into bed, tucked him in a night, and actually laid next to him after he passed away. Then, permanently seeking to conceal his crime, Nilsen prized up the floorboards of his flat and pushed Stephen into the crawl space below. Because of the rigor mortis that had already set in and stiffened the body, Dennis had to wait until the following day and wrap the teenager in a curtain to ease him into the gap. A week later, curious about the stages of decomposition, he exhumed the body from under the floor, bathed it again, and masturbated over the corpse. He even suspended the teenager by his ankles from the ceiling overnight. Stephen's remains were then kept under the floorboards for over 8 months, until in August of 1979, when Dennis created a large bonfire and burnt Stephen's body. And after this killing, I think what was clear is that Dennis felt guilt. He started to try and change his life. He stopped drinking. He stopped going to the bars. He even stopped inviting men back to his flat for a period of time. And he focused his time on the job centre. In his mind, he was trying to live a productive, good life and avoid himself being turned into the police. He felt that if he did that, he would be able to live with himself and he wouldn't feel any more guilt. But after burning the body and actually getting rid of the person that he was looking at, the body that he cherished so much, he actually lost a sense of power and control. And this started the negative behavior going on. And Dennis started to spiral. And that leads us to October the 11th, 1979, when Dennis meets a young Chinese student named Andrew Ho at an arcade in Leicester Square. And again, he invites him back. So again, he tries to strangle Andrew, but this time he's able to fight back and manages to push Dennis off of him and actually does get away. Andrew reports his incident to the police, but because he was worried about the ramifications and because he didn't actually want to go through with reporting Dennis, nothing came of this police report. The police eventually did interview Nilsen, but he said that it was very much a lover's tiff and that there was nothing more to it than that. This led to Dennis continuing his drinking and continuing to try and find another partner, which is when in December 1979, he meets another young man, his second victim, called Kenneth Ockenden. He was a 23-year-old student who had been born in the UK but emigrated to Canada with his family as a teenager. And in the autumn of 1979, he was trained to be a welder and had saved up enough money for a 3-month trip to Britain to visit his relatives and indulge his passion of photography before becoming a fully fledged welder. And on December the 3rd, 1979, Kenneth was just a few days away from returning back to Canada. He called his uncle Gordon to say that he'd be stopping by in a couple of days to pick up some cash that Gordon had stashed for him. Later that day, Kenneth goes to a pub called the Princess Louise pub in Holborn. There he meets Dennis Nilsen, and the two bought each other a round of drinks. And as Ockenden was a tourist, Dennis actually offers to take him around London, show him the sights, and use his very precious and very prized Canon camera to capture those scenes. Dennis then invites him back to the flat. They pick up a load of booze on the way and they split the bill. Dennis cooks Kenneth a meal and they spend the evening together watching television, drinking, and listening to Nilsen's record collection. Nilsen really enjoyed spending time with Kenneth, but again, he was worried about him leaving the next day. And in the early hours of the morning, when Ockenden was listening to records using the headphones that Dennis Nilsen gave him, he actually strangled Kenneth from behind using the wire of that headphone. He strangles him until he passes away. Then Dennis untangles the cord from Kenneth's neck. He sits down, he pours himself a drink, and he thinks about what to do next. And what does he do? Well, he puts the headphones back on and he listens to the track that Kenneth was listening to just before he was attacked. Following the murder, Nilsen then strips and bathes the body and lays it next to him in the same way that he did in the first killing. The next day, Nilsen went to work and purchased a cheap Polaroid camera during his shift. He returned home, he dressed the corpse in socks and briefs and a tank top and posed Ockenden in various positions and took several photographs while speaking to him as if he were alive. That night, Nilsen laid Ockenden's body on top of his own while watching television. He molested the corpse and eventually hid it beneath the floorboards. Over the next 2 weeks, Dennis brings the corpse back up into the flat over 4 times. He would pose the corpse watching TV, sitting with him in an armchair. And he said to Brian Masters later that he felt that Kenneth was so beautiful, it nearly brought him to tears. And when Kenneth didn't turn up to his uncle's place, the family reported him missing. The police searched his hotel room and they found his belongings except for his camera and a map. It sparked a huge search, so much so that the Canadian government got involved. And in February 1980, Kenneth's parents actually came and flew from Canada to start the search. They put up posters all over London and they appealed to the media to try and help find their son. But once again, Dennis evades capture and goes about a seemingly normal life to everyone that knew him. And this was until May 1980, when Dennis meets a 16-year-old boy called Martin Duffy. Martin was a runaway catering student from Birkenhead in Merseyside and had experienced an incredibly troubled childhood. He left high school at the age of 15, struggling to find work, and he frequently got into trouble with the authorities. His parents had sent him to a special school for maladjusted children where he received psychological treatment, but following the divorce, Martin developed an addiction to Valium. And despite a particularly hard upbringing, he completed the catering course and actually got a prize when graduating of a set of Chef's Knives that he was absolutely so proud to receive. In May, he got in trouble with the British Transport Police in Birkenhead, and so he decided to do what anyone would do in that situation. He left Birkenhead and he headed straight towards London. He hoped for a better life. And it was on May 17th, 1980, that Dennis then bumped into Martin in Euston Station. Martin was not in a good place at all. He looked incredibly unwell, he looked unfed, and he was struggling. Taking advantage of that vulnerability, Dennis actually invites Martin back to his place for a proper meal and a series of drinks. When the two get back to Melrose Avenue, they drink the beers and they fall asleep on Dennis's bed. Then Dennis got on top of Martin, he strangled him and drowned him in a sink in the kitchen. Again, Dennis bathed the lifeless body, kissing the corpse and masturbating in his bed. He stored the body in a cupboard for 2 days. However, once he noticed the body was showing signs of bloating, he removed the remains and buried Martin beneath the floorboards alongside his previous victim, Kenneth Ockenden. He then went through his belongings and he found there was a luggage ticket that directs him back to Euston Station. He goes to find Martin's belongings, and in those belongings, he finds the series of Chef's Knives. Dennis then keeps those Chef's Knives and uses them in the subsequent attacks to butcher the bodies. The next attack was in August 1980 when Dennis met a man called William Sutherland, a 26-year-old from Scotland. William had a young son back home, but when he moved to London for work, he left the son and his girlfriend behind. He met Dennis at the job centre as he was keen to work as a chef. They then started chatting more casually and decided to go on a pub crawl, and Dennis asked Billy at the end of the night if he would go back with him to his flat. There, Dennis strangled William with his bare hands, and Nilsen then hid Billy's body underneath the floorboards of his flat.
You know, when he's strangling people and he's obviously using his force to overcome these men and stuff like that, obviously the elephant in the room is the fact that a lot of them are, let's be honest, close to incapacitated at the time. So, you know, we're not giving him too much credit for this. But one of the things is, you know, like, people that worked with him described him as a bit of a weakling. Yeah. And he confessed himself to be not a strong person at all in terms of actual physical strength.
Yeah, quite a skinny guy. Yeah.
Quite a skinny guy, not that physically strong. Yeah. But in one of his memoirs, I don't know whether he was questioned on this or whether it was a chain of thought, but he said that something just overcame him when he had these men in his hands, things like that. And there was an inner strength that he was able to draw on that was probably 10 times stronger than, I don't know, he'd be able to push weights at a gym or something like that. Almost like a possession.
Yeah, it was, for me, I think this was a sort of a sexual kick that he got out of it. And he gained this sort of, this power from the endorphins and from the sort of adrenaline that he would get in this moment. And he got such a kick from it, it was infectious and addictive to him.
So that's 3 so far, that he's got underneath his floorboards. Yeah. What's he do with them? You can't just keep putting them under there.
You can't do that. And what was happening, this is devastating to be honest with you, is that he actually started running out of room. We've just heard that he put one of them in a cupboard. So again, under the floor, there wasn't that much space. So what he decided to do was exhume all of those bodies in various states of decomposition. You can imagine how bad this is going to be. Well, this is months of attacks at this point.
Exhume, sorry, just for the people like me that wouldn't necessarily know what exhume even means.
Open the floorboards up, pull the bodies out.
Right.
He takes them into the garden, he builds a bonfire and puts the bodies on a bonfire. The fact that no one even saw this, bearing in mind this is in London, like Cricklewood. This is a big part of London, various other flats all around him. He's living in a ground floor flat where there's other tenants and people looking over the flat into this garden, which he only had private access for. I find it crazy that he was able to burn these bodies at this point. And so much so, he actually had to put tires on the fire, and he also had to put other, I think, like deodorant sticks around the fire so that no one would smell the burning sensation and the flesh of these bodies. But as he was dissecting these bodies and as he was putting them on the fire, there were other body parts that he wasn't able to put on there. And so what he started to do was, for example, boil the heads of his victims in large pots and also put internal organs into bags that he actually stuffed between the double fencing in his backyard so that animals would actually come and eat those organs. Then in November 1980, another attack happened, but this time the victim survived. Dennis met a man called Douglas Stewart, who was a fellow Scotsman and had stopped in a pub because it served his favourite Scottish beer. Douglas drinks with Dennis and then goes back to his flat, but only because he said he didn't want to feel awkward, because Dennis had actually invited various other people that said they would come with him, but they ended up not. Douglas gets back and has a couple of beers with Dennis and asks him to share a bed with him to go to sleep. Douglas declines this offer, but falls asleep instead in the living room armchair. He wakes up and he's tied to the chair and he's being choked with his own tie. Douglas managed to fight back and he scratches Dennis underneath the eye. Dennis then starts shouting, "Take my money," to play the victim, and realizing that he needed to play it safe to survive, Douglas actually apologizes to Dennis and stays for one more drink and then decides to flee the flat and call the police. When the police get to the flat, Dennis tells them a very different story about what happened. And as a result, the police pile this off as a lover's tiff, and nothing actually happens to Dennis as a result of this complaint. Douglas doesn't even press charges. The final victim at Melrose Avenue was a man called Malcolm Barlow. After the incident with Douglas, Dennis was mugged and his flat was trashed, and he didn't get a promotion again, so he was getting worse and worse. Malcolm was in his early 20s, and when Dennis met him, he was really struggling with his mental health. And Previously, he was raised in foster care. Malcolm was highly vulnerable. He relied on welfare benefits and occasionally engaged in sex work, sleeping in hostels or with anyone that would take him off the streets. On the morning of September the 17th, 1981, Dennis was off to work and he saw Malcolm slumped by a wall very close to his Melrose Avenue flat. Dennis takes him into the flat, feeds and waters him, and calls an ambulance. The next day, September the 18th, Malcolm was discharged from hospital and because of the man's kindness, returns to the flat to see Dennis to thank him for looking after him. Nilsen invites him inside where he cooks him a meal and invited him to sit down and watch television together that evening. Malcolm actually asked for an alcoholic drink. Before he was actually offered an alcoholic drink, Nilsen said, I don't want to give you anything. The medication that you've had that obviously makes you feel unwell and hospitalizes you might implicate things. So I'm not going to give you any more alcohol. But Malcolm convinces him to give him some. And so he has a couple of drinks. And after consuming 2 rum and cokes, Malcolm actually falls asleep on the sofa. An hour later, Dennis tries to wake up Malcolm by slapping him. It didn't work. He didn't want to call the ambulance again just in case it brought unwarranted attention. So if he didn't want attention, Joey, what did he do next?
Going on what he's done every other time, I'd assume he strangled him.
Yes, that is exactly what he did. I mean, probably would bring you some more attention than you possibly want from not calling an ambulance, but there you go. He then drags Malcolm's body into the kitchen and the next day he puts him in a cupboard underneath the sink. All in all, between November 1980 and May 1981, Nilsen was also said to have killed 7 other men that were never formally identified. And a question that I've never really understood is that how could he keep getting away with this? As we've said, overlooked, people in close proximity. And it reminded me of a case, Joey, that we've mentioned already on the episode, the Jeffrey Dahmer case. Jeffrey Dahmer lives in a block of flats. People were living in very close proximity. They heard some very, very strange thing coming from that flat. But again, it enabled more and more people to die and pass away because it was never truly reported or followed up by the police. And this is definitely what was going on in this Dennis Nilsen case.
The similarities of the Dennis Nilsen case and the Jeffrey Dahmer case, when you then factor in the context that the likelihood is that neither of them knew each other, neither of them knew of any of their crimes, because obviously they were committing crimes for quite a long time span.
Yep.
So it wasn't like either were really active when the other one was found out. I could be proven wrong on this, but the similarities of these 2 men from separate sides of the pond, so to speak, how we say it here. One's from the UK, one's from the US. It's uncanny in their characteristic behaviours, their traits.
Yeah.
And also how they evaded capture at times.
100%. And also, do you remember what you said earlier on about his charisma with new people? He was very good at being confident and being able to sort of, start up a conversation and ultimately get a lot of people back to his flat. He was very convincing. What we haven't said is that people that were close to him very often disliked him. So the people and colleagues at work, his bosses at work, and also the neighbours were very unsure of Dennis. They were very unsure of what was going on, and they often saw people coming in and out of the flat in a very unusual way, I would say, okay? And what we have to say at this point is that the people that actually owned the flat, the landlords of Melrose Avenue, absolutely hated Dennis, and they wanted to get rid of him as soon as they possibly could. They said to him that they wanted to renovate that flat, and so he had to temporarily leave the premises so that they could start those renovations. Dennis saw this as a bit of a ploy to get him away from the flat, and so he declined that offer and actually started a bit of like a legal to and fro between them for a pretty considerable amount of time, several months. And so the landlords actually had to concoct a scheme with the estate agent to get rid of him. The estate agent then said, I found you this beautiful self-contained flat. It's in a different location and you can move into it straight away. Just let me show you around. But Dennis sort of was unsure. He didn't know whether he wanted to do that. So the landlords actually stumped up £1,000 as a sort of bonus to get him out of the flat and into this other location. As soon as he got that £1,000 offer, as soon as he saw this new flat, he moved straight away, accepted the estate agent's offer on the same day that he saw the place. And that was 5 miles away from Melrose Avenue. And it was 23 Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill.
But there's a problem, Josh, with this new address, isn't there? There's no garden. there's no floor space, and therefore there's nowhere really for him to be able to hide his remains anymore. And maybe that would finally be the factor that just put an end to all of this horrific offending.
That's definitely not the case. Unfortunately, it gets far worse from here.
It does, because roughly 6 weeks after moving in, it's Dennis's birthday, and to celebrate, he goes to a pub called the Golden Lion in Soho. And that night, he meets another fella called Paul Nobbs, and the story, as I believe it, was Paul Nobbs was actually being chatted up by another guy on the night. Paul Nobbs wasn't interested. Dennis, the knight in shining armour, by the way, intervenes and buys Paul a drink. He's the saviour. He gets Paul away from this guy that Paul doesn't want to be spending time with, but what Paul does is take an interest in Dennis, as many of these other men had. They get talking, they're drinking together, and eventually he gets Paul Nobbs back to his flat. So Dennis, on his 36th birthday, sleeps with 19-year-old Paul Nobbs. And in probably one of the biggest strokes of luck for any victim in this case, Dennis Nilsen does something very, very out of the ordinary. He waits for Paul Nobbs to fall asleep. He starts strangling him, and then he stops. He decides not to kill him, and he rolls over and goes to sleep. And when Paul Nobbs wakes up, he sees red on his neck. He's got a pounding headache. His eyes are all bloodshot, and he turns around to Dennis and asks him what has happened. And Dennis tells him that it's probably from the Bacardi that he drank the night before. Paul actually went to a doctor after that, and that doctor told him that he had more than likely been strangled. Someone had probably tried to kill him, but Paul was too scared to report this to the police because, like we've said, the homophobia within the police force, and also the worry of his family finding out he was gay because he wasn't openly homosexual in front of his family. Shortly after that, Dennis meets a guy called Toshimitsu Ozawa in a bar and gets him back to the house. Dennis thinks he's asleep, but he's not. And when he tried to strangle Ozawa with a necktie, his victim fights him off. He flees the apartment. And once again, he fails to report it to the police. And at this point, I don't think you even have to ask the question. I think you've got the answer. Clearly, there was something that was stopping these men reporting stuff to the police. And I think that stigmatism is there for everyone to see.
It's such a shame, actually, isn't it? Because you are more afraid almost of the police at this point than you are of a serial killer. That tells you everything.
Not just that, it's such a shame because there are severe injustices, in my opinion, and actually they would shape the way that we look at true crime cases throughout history. I am of the personal belief, I'm not speaking on Josh's behalf here, I am of the personal belief that Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, also attacked men. I believe that he attacked two men. You know, if you put a weapon to my head and said, I'm about to pull the trigger, you need to answer, did he attack at least one man? I'd say yeah. And there was a man that picked Peter Sutcliffe out of a lineup after being attacked. Very similar methods, very similar style, same location, everything. Sutcliffe basically had no alibi. And I can only really put it down to, do you call it constitutional? Is that the word? Constitutional homophobia?
Yeah, basically institutional is the word you mean.
Institutional. Yeah. This is why we have Josh here.
Dictionary corner.
Dictionary corner over here. I can only really put that down to sort of institutional homophobia because you watch the Yorkshire Ripper video if you want more on that. But mate, that theory that I've just come up, well, not I've just come up with, but that theory I believe, right, is it tin hat-esque? Is it far-fetched? Or do you think there's weight to me saying
No, based on the evidence you've always said and given in that episode, which you absolutely should watch, that's the part 2 that you're talking about, where we look at his claims of attacking men. I think that there is substantial evidence, let alone first-hand accounts of people actually saying that it was Peter Sutcliffe. So yes, I do believe that was the case.
Well, there you go. Now what we know, what we're dealing with, which in our opinion is a fairly severely homophobic police force at the time. Now, at that time, March 1982, Dennis is drinking in a pub near Leicester Square and he spots a fella that he's met before. He didn't kill this fella. I mean, he can't have done because he just spotted him in Leicester Square. Exactly. So it's kind of close to physically impossible. But he spots him in Leicester Square and they start having a drink together. And as per usual, after a few drinks, it's back to Dennis's place. John Howlett was the man's name, and he was actually a former soldier. That may give us a little bit of insight into why these two had connected in the first place. Once he gets him back to the flat, Dennis Nilsen strangles him in the bathroom and then, I believe, drowns him in the bathtub. And then in May 1982, Dennis Nilsen goes to a drag show. He buys drinks for one of the performers called Carl Strotter, and then he invites him back to his flat. Anyway, these two are getting on. They're having a drink together. They're listening to some music together. And eventually, the same thing as usual happens. Carl falls asleep. Dennis strangles him. He passes out. Dennis thinks he's dead, I believe, but he's not dead. And Dennis then puts Carl in the bath. Now, once Carl's in the bath, he wakes up. And at this point, you're assuming that a fight is going to break out between the two, aren't you?
Well, yes, but also you can imagine in the state that he wakes up in, that'd be incredibly difficult.
He thinks that Dennis is helping him at the time. Dennis is bathing him. Dennis is caring for him. And he thinks that Dennis is helping him. What he didn't realise is that Dennis Nilsen, after trying to take his life, had saved his life. He had given him mouth to mouth. He had administered CPR. He gets him out the bath. He wraps him in blankets. He makes him a drink, and he even walks him to a tube station so that he can get the train home. What the fuck? Like, honestly, you know, when we're trying to distinguish patterns of behaviour between these killers that we cover, how can you draw any lines or dots with this man?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? With some of these near misses and people that manage to escape, he often seems to placate them after the fact and try and make out that something has happened. I think it's his mechanism to try and dissuade them from going to the authorities, make out that he's actually a good guy, make out that it might have just been an honest mistake or part of something more serious.
It's that selective empathy, isn't it? And I feel like a lot of these serial killers like dine out on that to an extent. Because say, for example, Peter Sutcliffe.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not being funny. Peter Sutcliffe was definitely proud of the fact that he never had intercourse with any of the women that he killed.
Attacked, yeah.
But it's like, what? Like, okay, you didn't group them.
Yeah.
You killed them.
So we're not sympathetic to you in any way. This is the thing. I think he disassociates these people from being people, and he sees them as objects, and he treats them in a way as if he would treat a pet. And this is what we didn't mention earlier on, is that he actually did have a record of hurting a young kitten when he was a kid. He actually killed a kitten. He strangled a kitten.
Well, there you go.
And this is the thing, like, he said afterwards to Brian Masters, which, again, everything that he says to Brian Masters, you have to take with a huge pinch of salt, let alone what I'm about to go on to in terms of the police interrogations, which are fascinating because he goes backwards and forwards. I think he says that he felt guilt, but then why, if he felt guilt, would he have even done these acts in the first place? No, there's things you can't just do something and then go, oh God, well, I felt really guilty about killing that animal.
No, it's a selective empathy type thing. I think you're right. I think that what actually happened was his plans weren't easily enough carried out. And in every circumstance and situation that happened, he put a spin on it to act like that inner empathy inside of him came. And that's the reason why no one would ever want to have heard an interview from inside prison of Ian Huntley or Ian Watkins or anyone like that. Whereas people like Dennis Nilsen and people like the Yorkshire Ripper and stuff, there's this weird thing where there's a certain type of person that will go, yeah, he never actually sexually assaulted those women though, did he? Oh, he did stop killing them a few times. It's weird. It's bollocks. It's a weird little rabbit hole to go down. Yeah. But it's not to say that there aren't people that do hold certain views about these killers.
But also in his own head, he's rationalizing what he's doing, because with anything that we do, we have to rationalize ourselves, and we see ourselves as the hero in our own story, don't we?
Oh, not me, mate. Not me.
Yeah, but like he saw himself as putting these men in peace. He saw them, having a moment of relaxation, of calmness. Even in death, he saw that as an element of peace, like he saw his grandfather. It all goes back to that trigger point. And he saw them, and he goes, when I was drowning, I felt peace and blissful. So this is what he goes and does. He goes and drowns all of these men because he seems like he's doing them a favor. But we all know, Dennis, that is not doing them a favor. You're murdering these people, and it is. I
don't think he thinks he's doing them a favor. I think he's enjoying it.
Yeah, well, he's definitely enjoying it. By the way, but again, let's get into that in a second, because I've got some quotes from his police interviews.
We can get into it, but let me just tell you one thing. Dennis Nilsen didn't feel like he was doing these men a favour, and fucking Peter Sutcliffe never heard a voice that told him to rid the world of prostitutes when he was digging graves. All of these lot will have fucking shit that they say. The truth is, they're all just fucking wrong uns. Anyway, that lad, right, when he gets walked to the tube station, instead of going home, do you know where he goes, Josh?
Does he go to the police station?
No. One better.
What?
He goes to the hospital.
Yes.
He goes to the hospital. He speaks about his night. He tells them that he had drunk a lot. I don't know. It would be my assumption, because of the scene back then, that there may have been substances involved, but that's not an allegation I'm making. I'm making an assumption there because of the scene and where they were, Soho, those sort of bars, whatnot. And the nurses say to him, no, someone's tried to kill you.
Yeah, you've got a clear ligature mark on your neck where someone has tried to strangle you.
So what does he do? Then he does go to the police. Mm-hmm. And what do the police do?
Nothing.
No, they do fuck all.
As per usual.
Do you want me to go into the details, or do I not need to?
I mean, pretty much suffice, doesn't it, really?
Yeah. The accounts suggest that he was disorientated and had no clear memory of where the attack occurred or who his attacker was. Now, let's take a stab in the dark. What profession of the person that reported that would you assume they were?
Seems like a police officer.
Sounds like a police spin, doesn't it? It sounds like the sort of thing a police officer might say to void theirself of any accountability.
I'm pretty sure that this was the victim that had the ligature marks on their neck for the next 3 months after this incident.
That's mental, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the thing. So this isn't a, near miss. Like, this is very clear attempted murder. And the fact that nothing came of it is incredibly shocking.
It's incredibly shocking, and it's incredibly damaging, because it meant that Dennis Nilsen was still on the prowl, hunting men, hunting victims, and carrying out some gruesome crimes. And next up, unfortunately, it was a man named Graham Allen who would become the 14th victim of Dennis Nilsen. And they actually met at a food stall. Do you know about this one, Josh?
Nope, go on, tell me.
So he meets him at a food stall. Listen, right, this is what I'm saying about Dennis Nilsen actually being good with words and being persuasive and stuff like this, right? If I meet you in a food stall, yeah, very, very unlikely I'm going to be able to convince you, fuck this food, come back to mine and let me cook for you.
You are a pretty good cook.
I am a pretty good cook, but you're at a food stall for convenience. Fast food, I want it now. Yeah. I don't want to go back to your flat and cook, but potentially it couldn't be cooking. Maybe they're going back to the flat for something else, yeah?
Maybe they were something else.
Fair enough.
Yep.
So he gets him back to the flat, and what do you think he does?
Strangles him.
He cooks him an omelette.
Oh, okay, that's quite nice.
You weren't expecting that, were you?
I wasn't expecting that. But unfortunately, of what I remember from this story, the omelette was only half eaten.
Yes, he was mid-eating the omelette, Graham Allen, and that's when Dennis Nilsen once again strangles him.
I don't believe this story, by the way. Like, you're just midway through an omelette, and then he started to feel unwell. Because, by the way, he didn't immediately strangle him, as per the account that he gave. Right. He said that he started eating the omelette, suddenly fell asleep midway through the omelette, and then strangled him. So, obviously, this omelette was either incredibly filling, Did he get this omelette from my edible drawer in the fridge or something?
Exactly. Mate, honestly, as if that omelette wasn't filled with... I don't think I get the substances. I can't say the name, but it's a substance that might start in a X,
yeah,
and end in an X.
Yeah, exactly.
Does it end in an X?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. His body was actually left in the bathtub for 4 whole days after that. Then on the 26th of January, 1983, Dennis Nilsen's walking through Leicester Square. He meets a 20-year-old man named Stephen Sinclair, and they have something in common. fellow Scots. Stephen Sinclair had travelled down here from Scotland and he had fallen on hard times. In fact, he had pretty much always been in hard times. And by the time that he meets Dennis Nilsen, he has no real fixed accommodation, no real money, and he's taking hard substances, Josh. We're talking injections.
Yes, he was not in a good way and he was living rough. And I think we have to say at this point, a lot of these victims were men that were down on their luck. They were having a very tough time of life and they were very, very vulnerable. And I think this victim in particular shows that very visibly.
Well, this is actually kind of heartbreaking, you know, and I'm not saying the others aren't, but Dennis gets him back to the flat and he does the usual. This guy's a substance user already, so very easy to incapacitate him. He strangles him, he gets him in the bath, all these sort of things. But do you know a little sort of post-arrest confession he made? And it's honestly such a sad part of this case. I don't know if you know about this. Do you know what he said about this young man?
Go on.
He basically said that once, he didn't before, but once he was dead and he was in the bath, he noticed fresh slits on both wrists. So this man had tried to take his life a few days. I didn't know that. I mean, if they were fresh, you're assuming within the
couple
fortnight.
Of days, yeah.
Within a couple of days probably, but absolute maximum within the fortnight before this man was killed.
Brutal.
More than likely hours, 72 hours, something of that. This man had tried to take his own life.
And you just know that in Dennis's sick mind, he would see this as doing him a favour.
Oh, mate, this cunt's probably thought he thinks he's acting God.
Yeah.
At that point, I mean, he doesn't really need justification because in his mind he thinks he's dead. But at that point, that would have been like a sign to him probably of like, yep, see, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
You're not. You're a fucking weirdo. So obviously Josh has given you a few of the gruesome details on how Dennis was disposing of his victims, and although I did earlier mention that once he moved, he no longer had the storage space, so to speak, he would still find ways. He'd dismember their bodies with larger parts like heads and torsos, he'd boil them down and then break up the bones, and this process actually took hundreds of hours. And then he'd flush as much of it as he could down the toilet. So he had an answer to get rid of them. But no matter how big your toilet is, Josh, no one's telling me that you're flushing a forearm or a shin bone down the toilet.
It's impossible. You can't do it.
It's not happening. So for those parts, he conceals them and he hides them where he can, any nook and cranny in the house, drawers, anything, cupboards. He will hide these body parts everywhere. But he's got a problem. He's running out of room now. The problem was that he didn't realise that his problem was his problem and not his fucking landlord's problem. This idiot who had gotten away with so many crimes wrote a letter as a tenant to his landlord about the sewage, the drainage, about it all being blocked up. And we know why it was blocked up. Because he was shoving flesh and human bones down there. So in the end, the landlord takes it seriously because it's not just actually Dennis. There's multiple tenants in there and they're all complaining. The landlord takes it seriously. He sends out a company called Dino Rod to go over and take a look at the drains, right? And when the worker's there, who stood over him the whole time? Is it any of the other tenants or is it just Dennis?
It's just Dennis. There's also a scene in this where the Dino Rod actually tries to go into the flat. The dog, Bleep, actually runs out of the flat. Dennis runs after him and he says to the Dino Rod guy, do not go into my flat. You are forbidden from going into that. And I'm just saying now, if that's not a warning sign alone to get that flat checked out, then I don't know what is.
Exactly. But Dennis had some pretty good lies of how that might have got in the sewage and that. Do you know what he told him?
Was it KFC?
He said it looks like KFC to me.
Yeah, so as you do, when you're done with your KFC bucket, you just flush it down the toilet.
I don't think you do.
No.
Do you know why?
I've never done that.
Finger licking good, mate.
You just eat all of it?
You eat all of it?
Yeah, fair enough.
You eat all of it.
Fair
and then with the rest of the bones?
Just chew on them. Stock, maybe?
You've got a
chicken
dog,
stock?
you could give them to the dog.
Yeah.
You could do a nice stew with them, use them as chicken stock, or you could just put them in the bin.
Could just put
them in the bin. You know it's not against the law to throw chicken bones in a bin.
A bit more difficult than putting them down the toilet, though.
Yeah, but also, why would you put a chicken bone down the toilet?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So why are you suggesting it's KFC when everyone knows you eat and then put a KFC in the bin, not down the toilet. And clearly, the worker was a little bit more clued up than Dennis thought he was. He knew straight away that it was human flesh. He went back, he told his boss. He said, boss, you got to come down to this job with me because I'm sure that's human flesh that I'm finding. His boss does. But it takes him about 24 hours, right? And in the meantime, Dennis is down there. You know how you said he was like openly having these fires in the back garden?
Yeah.
I'm not being funny. What must the other tenants have thought when in that 24 hours, Dennis is going through the drains and clearing them out himself?
Well, they saw him.
They saw him do that.
Yeah. Which must have been terrifying. Like he's out there with a torch in the middle of the night going through the drains.
Creepy guy, by the way. Like not.
Oh my God.
And I'm not like, well, I don't even give a fuck if I'm digging him out, but I'm not like, my sister used to have a neighbour, yeah, like this guy. He probably is a serial killer, to be fair. I hated him.
Report him now.
He's one of them. I knew it because he used to like shout at my sister, and then I'd walk out 5 foot nothing, and it'd be and he'd go and hide in the bush. Typical, these people that are violent towards vulnerable people. But what I'm saying is, if I had have ever seen that guy doing that, I would have been freaked out, mate. Freaked out. So you can only imagine these neighbours, these tenants, and even not just the tenants, the neighbours, the neighbouring houses, they all think this guy's weird. Then he's out there with a torch in the middle of the night and removing what he thinks are KFC bones from it. It's just obvious. The police go back the next day. They knock on his door. They tell him they want to speak to him. And do you know what he says?
Come.
He says, since when are police interested in sewage? The police officer says to him, well, let me come inside and I'll discuss it with you. And Dennis kind of pauses at the door for a moment because his stance on having anyone in the house. Come on then. That's what he eventually says to them. Lets them in.
Yeah. And that's a big moment.
The second the police officers enter the house, they know the smell. It's rotting corpses. And he says to him straight away, Dennis, where's the rest of the body? And Dennis points to the cupboard and says, yeah, it's in there. They're in the police car. He nicks him straight away. By the way, I don't think they had a pair of handcuffs on them for some reason. This is really weird, isn't it? Why would you rock up there without a pair of handcuffs? I could be wrong on that. Let me know in the comment section below. But the evidence that I've trailed through and tried to find out, there's a lot of reports in there, first-hand accounts rather, that suggest that maybe the police officer in question didn't have a pair of handcuffs on him, but obviously he restrained Dennis there and then. Dennis in the back of the car is still conversing with the police officers. Like he's not using his right to remain silent or anything like that. And the police officer says to him, look, mate, are we talking about 1 or 2 bodies here? And Dennis replies to him, more like 15 or 16.
So what the police do is they take him back to the station and there he goes under 30 hours of interrogation. And you might think at this point that he asks for a solicitor, he shuts up and he doesn't say anything, but that is the complete opposite of what he does. He says he doesn't want a solicitor and he goes through his account, first-hand account with the police and gives them all of the gruesome details about what he has done. And there are some insane quotes from this police interview. He was asked, first question, why did you commit these murders? And what does he say? Well, he says, I'm hoping that you'll be able to tell me that. He's asking the police to actually give him some justification of his own crimes. He also then went on to say that it amazes me that I have no tears for these victims, clearly showing that he had absolutely no remorse for any of the people that he'd killed. And then he insisted that he didn't take any pleasure from the act of killing itself, but noted that he actually worshipped the art and act of death. That pretty much says that you're getting pleasure from killing people, Dennis. I'm sorry to say. So the police had a series of evidence, including a written and oral confession by Dennis Nilsen. So we go to the Old Bailey and the trial that started on October the 24th, 1983. Dennis Nilsen was formally charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Throughout the police's investigation, they also found 2 or 3 more cases that Dennis had confessed to, but they didn't have enough time before the trial started to actually include those counts of murder within the trial itself. Now, Joey, during this trial, can I ask you what you think he pled? Do you reckon he went guilty or not guilty?
I actually don't know this, so I'm going to guess, did he try the insanity card?
Well, he obviously, I would have presumed, pled guilty because He's just spent the last 30 hours of police interrogation explaining everything and going into great detail of his crimes.
Yeah, the only reason I didn't say guilty is because it's such an obvious stonewall guilty, isn't it?
Yeah.
The fact you've asked me the question
means
makes
it's
me
not
think
guilty.
that maybe he might have. But no, my mind can't comprehend a not guilty plea. The furthest I could go to is the trying to get out on the grounds of insanity like all these weasels do.
Well, as per usual, Joey is correct in this assertion.
Am I?
Because he pled not guilty, and the defence said that he was insane and unfit to stand trial for the claims. And they said that it was obviously manslaughter because he didn't know what he was doing.
Oh, mate, I can't keep doing with these. Oh, he's insane. He's insane. Of course they're insane. They killed someone. Sane people don't kill people voluntarily for no reason.
Yeah.
It shouldn't even be allowed.
It shouldn't be allowed.
That thing in court should not be allowed to say, oh, you're insane. You're insane. Oh, he's insane, is he? Oh, yeah. No, he's a cunt.
And a serial killer, which is quite clearly a very serious crime that you need to be guilty for. And you've just spent the last 30 hours explaining exactly what you did and where. So quite frankly, you're sane enough to do that. Stand trial, plead guilty, let people off and not have to listen to all the evidence. Unfortunately, Joey, that is exactly what happened. The defense actually called 2 psychiatrists to the stand, and they said that he did, in fact, have mental issues, mental problems. And I have to say, absolutely right in saying that, by the way. Yes, he did have mental problems. They said that he had false self syndrome and schizoid disturbances that substantially impaired his responsibility. The prosecution, led by Alan Green QC, strongly rejected the assertion that he is unfit to stand trial, saying that he was perfectly sane, cunning, and killed with premeditation. And they actually had to go into the court case and explain why that premeditation was there and how he planned his crimes and knew exactly what he was doing. And as I say, and as you can imagine, when you plead not guilty, you have to go through a series of evidence. And this evidence was so bad that some of the jury actually said they didn't want to be involved in the trial. That's how scared they were about seeing it. The judge actually had to say that some of the photography from inside the flat wouldn't be admitted into trial because of how awful it would be for the jury. So they had to listen to various different pieces of evidence. They had to listen to his first-hand account, which the police had transcribed, and it took them 4 hours to go through the evidence in trial, just listening to his account. The jury also saw various other physical evidence, including a chopping board in which he used to dismember the bodies, as well as the cooking pot in which he boiled the head of some of his victims. And I would say the most damaging evidence of the entire trial was from the testimonies of the 3 men who survived his attacks. So how could you say that there's limited and diminished responsibility when there are 3 men actually testifying in court to say this man attacked me and he knew exactly what he was doing? So much so that Carl Storer, the last person that he attacked and managed to survive, said that Nilsen actively warned him about a faulty zipper in a sleeping bag. And then he used that excuse to say, oh, you've just got caught in a sleeping bag. It's your own fault. When we knew full well that he was using that sleeping bag to attack and try to murder him. The jury then retired to deliberate on November the 3rd, 1983, but they struggled to reach a unanimous decision. How the hell, after all of that evidence, the man is actually confessing to the crime, they didn't manage to get a unanimous decision is beyond me. The next day, the judge comes in and goes, we'll accept a majority decision and let's get on with it. And that's when the jury returned a guilty verdict on 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Justice Croom Johnson sentenced Nilsen to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of just 25 years.
How is that a minimum of 25 years?
I honestly have no idea. This is for sure one of the worst serial killers in UK history, and he has a minimum sentence of 25 years. The guy was boiling heads, burying dead bodies under his floorboards, and trying to flush body parts down a toilet.
What was Peter Sutcliffe's minimum? There was no minimum. He just never...
I think it was life imprisonment, yeah.
So why...
Doesn't make any sense, does it?
This is just baffling me, mate.
Well, the good news, mate, is that over a decade later, in December 1994, the Home Secretary at the time, called Michael Howard, got some new powers. He had the power to then increase the minimum sentences, and he actually sentenced Nilsen to the whole life tariff, meaning that he would never be able to escape prison. And I think that Dennis actually wanted that, because by all accounts, when he actually got sent to prison, he acknowledged that his crimes were awful and acknowledged that he needed to serve time in jail. And that's where I want to know from you, Joey, what happened next?
Yeah, so much like a few of the guys that we've covered on this channel, you would often expect that once they get sent to prison, no one ever hears from them again. They see out their days, they die in prison, and we don't have to think all that much about them. That was not the case with Dennis Nilsen. Whether it was through prison attacks or whether it was through himself voluntarily reinserting himself into the media, Dennis Nilsen lived on. They initially send him to Wormwood Scrubs, and it only takes a couple of days, I think, for the inmates to actually get to him. A man named Albert Moffat uses a prison shank to slash at Dennis Nilsen. He catches him in the face. I believe he catches him across the chest. And Dennis Nilsen actually needs about 84 stitches. Moffat got an additional 4 years onto the end of his sentence, and in his defense, I suppose you would call it, when it goes to trial, he just basically showed no remorse. And he said that he did it in self-defense. Did you know this?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he said that he stabbed him in self-defense because Dennis Nilsen had been making advances towards him. In the prison.
I remember this now. Yeah. Do you actually think that was the case?
No.
We know that.
For once, I think it's Nilsen telling the truth, probably. But listen, I'm all for it. If it had have got him off with the extra 4 years, then again, I shouldn't say that. You never know what he was inside for. Either way, that was the first prison attack. And Dennis Nilsen was put in solitary confinement after that. At one point, right, he attacks a prison guard in Wormwood Scrubs, and he spends 56 days in solitary confinement off of the back of that. He also spent time inside HMP Whitmore, and it was here that he encountered another attack. This time, prisoners threw boiling water over him, and Nilsen suffered severe burns to his back and arms. He required significant medical treatment and was reportedly left with permanent scarring. It was said that the injuries could have been even worse, but Dennis Nilsen was able to partially fend off his attackers by throwing a battery at them. And another thing that Dennis Nilsen proved to be inside of the prison was just an absolute pest to both the guards, to even higher up powers, because you get these prison inmates that want to get the guards wrapped around their little finger, they want to put pressure on them, and some of them that aren't powerful inmates like Dennis Nilsen just complain and whine all the time, like an Ian Huntley would, for example, right? But Dennis Nilsen was probably a fair bit smarter than an Ian Huntley, and Dennis Nilsen went down the route of writing legal letters to the prison system. And obviously the fucked up way that our government works and whatever means that you are actually allowed to do this, and prisoners do have certain rights. And do you know, Josh, what he was complaining about?
No idea.
I swear to God, he was complaining to the prison system in formal letters, multi-page letter documents about the credit crunch, you know, like around like when we were in high school, they had the credit crunch.
The financial thing.
Yeah, the credit crunch. And what that meant was that they were now paying less. I didn't realise they even get paid, but it must go on the canteen and the books, stuff like that. Paying less for the jobs. And it meant that it was going to delay his retirement from working in the prison canteen. He wrote letters.
Honestly, mate, just piss off and shut up. I'm sorry.
It's not all he wrote. Me piss off or him?
No, him.
Oh, him. Sorry, I was going to wrap it up.
I'll never tell you to piss off.
He also wrote a book. Yeah, he spent decades writing it. 3.5 million words.
What?
3.5 million words he wrote.
That is terrifying.
Now, my dad's an author.
Yeah.
And I said to him the other day, I was like, I do loads of prep on these podcasts, like whatever, and I was showing him all my notes.
Yeah.
And he said, when did you do that? This week? I said, today. And he went, fuck off. I went, yeah. He went, do a word count on that. I said, what's a good day of writing for you? He's an author.
Yeah.
Tens of published books.
Yeah.
And do you know how many words he said to me?
Let me guess. 5,000?
4,000, he said, is a good day for him.
Really?
I remember he got Parkinson's. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, 4,000, he said was
5,000 would be amazing. 4,000 is great.
There you go. I had 3,000 words.
Did you?
In that thing. I've been doing it for a couple of hours.
This
is what I'm saying, right? So to be able to do 3.5 million words, approximately.
Imagine how many pages that would be in novel form.
Imagine how fucking boring it must be to read it.
Oh my God.
Oh God.
Yeah.
3.5 million words worth of painting yourself as some fucking anti-hero or whatever. He had prison pen pals, and he entrusted one of these so much that he gave the rights to his memoirs. It was eventually made into a book. So there was obviously victims, families and stuff that campaigned for it not to be.
There
was petitions, but it was eventually made into a book. It was downsized massively to about 1,300 words, something like
1,300 pages probably.
Sorry, 1,300 pages. It would have been, But it was downsized massively. And the book itself, the royalties from it always go to charity. So they don't go to Dennis Nilsen, they don't go to his family's estate, anything like that. I've never done a deep dive into that. I'm just saying what has been reported. He had a blood clot in his lungs as well as internal bleeding in his abdomen. And the strangest thing about his death, right, is he never really complained. In fact, didn't you say he didn't even want medical help?
He never went through any medical procedures in the prison. He didn't actually interrogate or go through any of those. He was meant to go through a screening when he reached 65 for this exact ailment, and he never turned up for that screening. So he could have actually lived for longer, but he didn't because this rupture actually caused him to pass away.
Not just live for longer, he just could have saved himself a lot of pain, which I'm happy that he didn't save himself a lot of pain, but he could have. Obviously, the guards found him hunched over in his cell. Apparently, he was in so much pain that this time he didn't refuse the medical care.
No.
He was taken to the hospital. He was told that he needed to be monitored. He needed to stay there. You'd think he'd want to stay there because it'd be a little bit nice in his prison cell anyway, and he refused. Not only did he refuse, he was rude to the point where his words were seen as violent, apparently. But, he didn't get physical with them or anything like that, which meant he goes back to his prison cell. And because he wasn't in a rush to receive any help, you could only assume the guards weren't in that much of a rush to help him. Apparently, he was on his floor for about 2 hours after he alerted.
It's even longer, 3 hours,
3 hours after he alerted the guards. When they found him, he's in his feces, he's operated on immediately. The operation is successful. Do you know this?
Was it? The first operation was successful.
The operation in general was successful, right?
Yeah.
But due to the amount of blood loss, he died 2 days later on the 12th of May 2018. So obviously there were arguments to be said that there wouldn't have been that much blood loss if the guards had got there sooner and whatever.
What a shame.
I can trump that by saying, well, the guards wouldn't have needed to get anywhere if he had just stayed at the fucking hospital.
Exactly.
And in terms of his book, when that came out, more revelations came to light. And that means to date, me and you and probably the rest of the world, to be fair, will never truly know how many victims Dennis Nilsen actually had.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult to get that particular number. But what we will do is show pictures of all the victims that we know and actually have been identified, because there are several that aren't identified at this point.
Yeah. And this is where I really want to say, like, with cases like these, I'm talking Dennis Nilsen, the Yorkshire Ripper. There are a few on our channel where, I mean, even, we spoke about the Jonestown massacre. There are many cases where I'm so hesitant to come across as non-sympathetic. And the reason I say that is because, listen, we don't own this studio that we record at. We have a select amount of time here each time. And with these bigger cases, sometimes we don't give every single one of the victims the sort of background and the description that I would love to be able to give them. Ultimately, it's a case of we do that and we make a 4-hour video that's stretched out and you only maybe get one video from us a month, or we try to tread as carefully and as respectfully as we possibly can, which is what I believe we always try and do. As well as that, at the same time, we are always going to be ourselves. I think we know when it's not appropriate to make a joke and whatnot, but at the same time as that, I am very much so going to be myself on this channel. So we hope that we have come at it from the best possible angle that we could have, and thoughts and prayers, as always, will go out to everyone that was not only a victim, not only a family member of a victim, but anyone that was affected by this case or, in fact, similar cases, Josh.
Yeah, 100%. And if you enjoyed this episode and want to watch more from us, please do subscribe to the channel and give this video a like if you enjoyed it. And while you're there, why don't you also check out our Spotify channel? We're putting all of these podcasts up on Spotify. And if you want to listen to them as you're out on a dog walk or out around town, that is a wonderful place to do just that. And also, while you're there, check out the Reddit. There's loads of people engaging with different cases, and we want to hear more from you, and your input will go directly into some of the follow-ups we do on some of the cases that we've already covered on the channel. Before we go, just remember, if you aren't yet a member, you can do so and join right now. Thank you to all of the huge members that make this channel what it is right now. All of their suggestions directly impact the videos that we make on this channel, and you can join and become a member for less than the price of a cup of coffee every single month. And when you do, you'll get access to videos 48 hours before anyone else. Thank you to all of the members that have supported us so far. And if you want to watch another video just like this, why don't you check out the Stephen Port case, the man that was dubbed the Grinder Killer. It's just like this case, but it involves technology and it involves various different crimes that are very, very similar. That will be on screen right now. Below that will be a video that YouTube recommends. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.